So Last Epoch just celebrated its 1 millionth copy of Last Epoch has been sold. And over the last 2 days, I've been going through playing some of that campaign, learning a bit about the game, and I'm going to give you a should you buy it? Is it worth $35? What are my first impressions? If you play Diablo 4, Path of Exile, what is something you might like about Last Epoch? And what are reasons you might not like the game? Type of video. So let's go. First selling point, it has an offline mode and an online mode. So if you are somebody that wants to use, let's say, a Steam Deck, Asus ROG Ally, what have you, and play it offline, they're going to have a fully complete play offline mode. In fact, I believe the play offline mode works right now. You see, you can make a character as well. So that is a selling point right off the rip. And speaking of RIP, they have hardcore as well as softcore. You're going to know this as SC, SC, SAF, which is basically the solo self-found variant of the game. And you'll know this HC, which is hardcore. The interesting thing about this is you can make a hardcore character. Let's say you make a hardcore solo self-found style of character. Then when your hardcore dies, it becomes a softcore solo self-found. So you can try to do a hardcore, see how far you go, and then you're not going to bring your stash tabs with you of all these stuff that you had in your stash, and we'll talk about stash tabs and all that in just a moment, but you don't straight up just lose your character and it gets deleted. So you can try hardcore if you want to see how far you can get. That was a selling point for me. Talking about character creation, the classes have masteries. There's like Void Knight, Forge, Paladin, etc. And you can see what these different skills will gain you when you're creating a class, and you're not locked into these. So while you do choose an ascendancy that you can't change basically later in them, you can actually put passive points into their passive skill tree regardless, which is interesting. You can also respecialize. So for instance, let's say I wanted to take some points away from Paladin. It would just cost me gold, which is not exactly difficult to get. And then if I wanted to take this and put the point that I just respect into, for instance, the other one, I could then do that by going to my passive tree and saying, okay, I want this point right here. And just like that, we have it. And I could go back and I could respect that again and be like, oh, I didn't actually want to do that. Let me get that back and put it right back to where it is. So the respecking, easy to do, works like you probably think it would, easy to understand. Easy to understand is actually going to be a common theme in this game, and I want to jump to one of the better parts of the game before we talk about the campaign, gear, crafting, all that sort of things. So when you have a skill, okay, let's say, I don't know, Void Cleave. When you click on the skill, you're going to see this, what looks like a somewhat intimidating skill tree. But then you very quickly realize the direction you go sort of doubles down on whatever that side is about. So this is Void Cleave. If I go here, it's going to do fire, ignite chance. If I go here, it's hellish chasm. If I go here, increases physical, also apply the fire damage. And you're going to see this is the fire side of things. Well, if I go this way, it's shorter cooldown, and now it's enemy armor reduction, more melee damage modifiers, and you see it's more of the utility side of things. Costs more mana, but does additional charge. If I go this way, it's going to be more damage multiplicative. Okay, its base critical strike chance is improved, and it can't be dodged. So this is more the crit side of things. So it's not really like that complicated. It's honestly pretty easy to understand. And the cool thing about this is at level 50, basically every 10 levels here, you're going to get a specialization, and you can just take one of these, you can drag it onto there and be like, okay, I now have hammer. You can despecialize at any time by either removing points or despecializing the entire tree in order to put another skill up there. You can basically pick 5 of these skills to have a skill tree on, but that doesn't mean you can only use those 5 skills. You can still use other ones that you're not exactly specialized in. So I could put Shield Bash here, which is not one of the 5 I have up here, and I can now use Shield Bash, or I can go right back and use Warpath, for instance, and what have you. You'll also notice that some of the trees synergize with each other. So one of my favorite moves in the game is Smite, and I made it all fire-based. And then when I go to the Warpath, my Warpath character, which is basically a barbarian spin, is fire as well. So when I scale my fire damage, it's scaling both of them. But the cool thing is, while I'm spinning, it has a chance to cast my Smite. And the Smite that it casts is one that's modified by my Smite skill tree. So even though each individual skill is understand, there is complexity of depth because they can interact with each other or trigger each other, and each of those are the full variant from your specialization, which is where some really cool builds will be enabled. If you didn't understand all of that, don't worry, it actually doesn't matter. Essentially, the skill tree is easy to understand when you're playing it, has depth into it regardless of its ease to use, can be modified at any time without punishing you for what you chose to basically build, and it's actually one of the most solid points of the game. So for me, it is definitely a selling point of the game. Let's talk about gearing. As skills and gearing is what really typically makes up an ARPG. I'm going to start with just standard gear. You have white items, blue items, yellow items, and then you have sort of your unique items, and then you have your legendary items, which are basically like yellow items with additional properties that can happen on them. One of the coolest things I experienced in this game was I got an item that had something called Weaver's Will. And what Weaver's Will did was, as I leveled, it added on an additional affix. And it also leveled up a random affix. So it was sort of like that item I got was evolving as I leveled my character. And it had sort of its own experience associated with it. So it was sort of continual RNG dopamine that happens with the individual item. And you're going to see here, this is one such item. So I got this ring, and originally it had health, mana spent as ward, which is basically just a shield. Some of the mana I spent will come back to me as a shield here. And this was an okay item, not amazing, but all right, right? But the Weaver's Will is the red one, and as I leveled it, it added on these lines. So originally it added the increased elemental damage over time, then the physical resistance and the cobra resistance, and it kept leveling these skills between them, picking a random one to level, and it ended up leveling my elemental damage over time, which was amazing for me because I'm sort of doing a fire damage over time build. So it was really exciting to see it leveled the elemental damage again. It leveled the elemental damage again. And this happened to me multiple times, from gloves to boots, etc. And the Weaver's Will was a way to kind of keep my gear progressing as well as being exciting. Now, it's RNG, not all your gear is going to be Weaver's Will, but it is one example of the itemization in the game actually being exciting. Now, let's say you don't have that type of drop, you just have a normal item. There's crafting in the game, and the crafting is fairly deep. So let's say you get just a yellow item drop, and you're like, wow, I like strength, I like mana, increased health regeneration, and poison resistance. These are good stats I like. And then next to the item itself, you can see it has armor and lightning resistance there, which are sort of its base stats. And underneath that, you're going to see it has forging potential. Well, forging potential is basically the amount of attempts that you're going to be able to have to upgrade the gear, and these amount of forging potential will be consumed depending upon what you're doing. So let's say, okay, well, what I want is I want this piece of gear to have more strength. You can click on upgrading the strength, and then you'll get these affix shards, which you acquire basically by disenchanting gear, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. And then I can say, I would like to upgrade my strength. Well, I can also add a glyph of hope, for instance, which has a 25% chance of making it not use the forging potential. So I have a chance here of it allowing me to continue to pump this gear. So I can go like that, and nope, that one didn't work. It was just forging potential upgraded. We can try it again. Still, forging potential was used. It was an upgrade. The glyph of hope didn't work. And now that time the glyph of hope didn't work, so it didn't work again. So I could have actually hit a critical success and not used the glyph. I could have not used the shards, etc. And then I could have really pumped this gear. Or you can just get unlucky like that. Now, there's other glyphs that do other things, like the glyph of chaos, for instance, will randomly regenerate a line. So if you read here, it says changes the upgraded affix to a different one that can spawn on the item type, cannot change a prefix into a suffix or vice versa. So if you have a prefix or a suffix you don't like, let's just say I didn't want mana on this, I could re-roll the mana stat out. Okay, now let's say that you don't like the item at all, and what you actually want to do is destroy the item and get shards back to craft on another item. So if I use a rune of shattering, it's going to destroy this item, and it's going to give me the shards from the item. So you can see I have mana shards, poison shards, health shards, as well as strength shards have been sent to my forge, which is right here. These are all my materials, and you can see your crafting materials right there. And then I could choose to now use those shards we just shattered to upgrade the next character. Or the next piece of gear, for instance. So this is how you continually acquire your shards. Shards can also just drop from killing monsters and allow you to continually upgrade your gear as it goes. And it's really not that complicated. You need strength shards to upgrade strength, mana shards for mana. You can shatter the gear to get those shards, or just pick them up off the ground. And that is the basics of crafting. Now, crafting actually does go even more in depth than this. This is just a basic look at it. There's things called legendary potential, etc. This is a first impressions and just should you buy type of video. So we're not going to go fully into crafting, as we could talk about this for a while. But if you're asking me, is crafting an item creation a selling point of the game? I would say in this scenario, yes. Something I want to mention too is that the unique items feel impactful. So I was able to get unique items for other classes. I was able to get set items for other classes. There are sets in this game, etc. But some of the items that I did get were maybe not necessarily just for my class, but more of a generic unique item that actually worked with what I was doing. So this is a fire starter torch that has a chance to inflict spreading flames on hit. Spreading flames is something that I'm building around. Again, I'm fire damage and fire damage over time. So this one worked great. This unique shield was for a different class because it's +2 to the Soul Feast, but it was block and block chance. It was better raw stats than my current item, so I ended up using it. I had another item here, which is another fire type of helmet, probably designed for mage, but it worked because I'm doing a fire paladin here. And so you can get unique items that do actually feel like they do something. You're definitely going to get unique items that feel like they're not as good as rare items. And I'm sure with the way the crafting goes, that the in-game builds are going to be mostly reiterated around normal items that you craft yourself, as opposed to these fire starter, uniques or what have you, especially because there's an exalted item we'll talk about in just a second. But the uniques feel really good while leveling, and they actually feel like a lot of these are quite useful, as opposed to like Path of Exile, where there's thousands of uniques, or however many there are, 1100, something like that, and almost all of them don't really feel like they have a use. I felt very often the uniques felt good, not overpowered, but good and useful while I'm acquiring them. Now, I mentioned exalted items. These are basically these purple items that will drop, and they can have stats that will have massively increased stats of affixes. So, for instance, the Rending Maul of Stillness, you can see 170% increased melee damage, and that is the exalted stat on that. So, obviously, if I was looking for increased melee damage, this would probably be an item that I would be very interested in using. And then you can obviously continue the craft on these because it has foraging potential, and I could continue to pump up whichever stat I might have the shards for. These seem fairly rare. I didn't get a lot of these while going through the campaign, and these seem like these could basically be your giga drops and the ones you're really looking for towards the end of the game. So there has been multiple ways I was excited by items. I had the unique drops. I had like the Weaver's Will legendary items. I had good base items that then I could craft on. I had these Exalt drops, and then there's even set gear. And I was getting set gear for other classes. Like, for instance, this is a Necromancer minion-based one, and I hear the minions are quite good in this game. I'll have to experience that still myself. But there are set items that you can worry about and build around as well. So itemization in the game seems pretty good in my experience. There's also the Idos, which as you go through the game and complete side quests, you're going to get these Ido spots available in sort of like a Tetris game or one of these wood sliding block games, in which you're going to take these pieces, these relics that you get again from drops, and they even some of the shrines, which are like shrine buffs, will drop some of these as well. And then you're going to slot them in here to give you different bonuses. So this is another way of being able to sort of min-max your gear for things like defensive properties. There are resistances in this game. Resistances do matter as much as they would in other games. So if you're familiar with ARPGs, you're going to have resistances. You have armor, which basically is your physical resistance, but then also mitigates non-physical at a smaller percentage. There's block chance, block, how much it actually does block when you do block. All of these different stats here are quite important when it goes into defensives, all right? But this is a way that allows you to sort of piece these together. Or what's cool about the Ido system is, let's say I really need necrotic, which I do. Then I could get a necrotic Ido that's juiced for the necrotic side of things, and I could put it in there. And this kind of helps you maneuver around the resistances you need without having to change all of your gear all of the time, because some of the acts maybe need other resistances other than some of the others. And so because of that, I find myself using these to sort of change around my resistances in order to play around what I need at the time, which makes it where I'm not constantly having to worry about my gear as I'm just progressing through the campaign. Also, this might be a minor thing, but it has a sort item tab that would do the little Tetris minigame for you. Because you're going to be getting a lot of gear, you can have stash tabs, and you can just basically get as many of these stash tabs as you want. You can sort them with different categories. You can just keep purchasing stash tabs. I want more. I want more. As far as I'm aware, there's no limit to these. Stash tab also has the sort function as well, which is super nice. Speaking of sorting and super nice, this game also has a loot filter built into it. If you go your gameplay settings, you can just manage your loot filters. And you can add as many different basically rules as you want. There's 75 rules you can add to this, for instance. And I could add a rule that says, you know what, add a condition. I don't want any of the magic items to show up at all. So I could go rarity, magic. Let's say I want magic here. And then I can either emphasize it to make it label only the magic items, or I could, for instance, add it where it's not going to show this at all. So for instance, I want to add magic, and I also want, let's say, class requirements of primalist items. Okay, so magic, primalist items, I want them to hide these. And you can add as many different condition modifiers as you want, as well as what exactly it's supposed to do with the visibility. You can also have character level dependency as well. So rule will only apply when your character is between certain character levels, and you can tab what character levels these are for. So the loot filter allows you to modify your filter in any way you basically want, perfectly for your character, and then you can just save that loot filter. This is my paladin one, and then I could have another loot filter that's for a completely different character. You can even copy in other people's loot filter settings as well if you would like, or share them with you, open your filter folder, etc., in order to import and what have you. So this is probably the best loot filter system I've ever seen in any game. So that's a significant quantity in terms of quality of life right out of the gate. Speaking of quality of life, the campaign is all right, but tracking it's pretty easy. So it'll show you where all the different quests are. You can just travel directly to them and teleport basically from anywhere to go different areas. The dungeons are clearly labeled, so it's easy to understand where to go as long as you're actually looking at your map. There's these different eras, which basically you're playing in the same area, but through different timelines. I won't try to spoil the story here for you. And then end of time is basically your end game here. Once you get to this point, and the in-game evolves around these monoliths that allow you to go basically from monolith to monolith, more or less a mapping style of system. I think the campaign is all right. I don't think the campaign is completely mind-blowingly amazing. I thought it was decent. I thought the bosses were fairly decent. The ability to get your side quest, also if I move my camera right here, you're going to see there's passive skill rewards 15 out of 15, idle slot rewards 6 out of 8. So you are going to get rewards from doing the different quests, but you don't have to do all of them. You just can see you can get rewards up to a cap here that are required, so you can kind of pick and choose which of the quests you want, as opposed to like Path of Exile where you have to do all of the ones that give you skill points. This does let you sort of optimize if you're a speed runner or something like that, which I am not, but or if you're someone who just is going to do the campaign multiple times for new characters and you want to only pick your favorite quest, or maybe you do one line of quest at one time and then the other one you try new ones on your other character. So it does give some diversity in actually playing the campaign multiple times as you play it, but basically only for those side quest rewards. So is the campaign a selling point? I think the campaign's all right. I don't think it's a major selling point. I don't think it's a detractor either. If you're somebody who only plays ARPGs for the campaign, I thought the D4 campaign was better in terms of cinematic, storytelling, etc. If you're somebody that mostly plays ARPG for in-game itemization, farming, build making, then that is going to be something you would more enjoy out of Last Epoch, as opposed to listening to every voice line, etc. Even though there is voice lines, there is voice acting, there is a story. If you enjoy those things, then you can go do it. I don't, so I blast through them. However, I do want to leave a point here for the bosses. I think the bosses are pretty cool, primarily sort of the ones more towards the end of the campaign, but I think the bosses are fairly decent. I did feel like the campaign, even though I died on my hardcore, to be fair, more towards the end of the campaign, I didn't feel like the campaign was overwhelmingly difficult. So if you're wondering, is this campaign the type of thing where it forces you really to learn all of the defenses, etc.? Not really towards the end. I feel like you're going to blast through it fairly easy, but then it starts to ramp up the difficulty fairly quickly more towards the end of the campaign. Part of the reason for that is as you go through, you actually are going to get your enemies will start penetrating resistances, penetrate 1% resistance per area level up to 75%. This penetration applies after the resistance cap. So effectively what this means is as you continue the campaign, you do need to be rolling more defensives into your character, as opposed to like PoE where you suddenly lose all your resistances at once. This is the type of situation where you're going to slowly ramp it until you hit a point where you're like, oh, wow, okay, they really are starting to shred me, which for me was about 80% of the way through the campaign. And then I had to start focusing on my gear a little bit more. One part I do want to mention I quite liked about the campaign was of the map side of things, which is that the maps were fairly easy to understand where I'm supposed to go for the most part. There were a few maps that were a little confusing that I had to do some backtracking, like the roof map, in order to figure out where exactly I'm supposed to be going here. But outside of that, it was actually pretty easy to understand for the most bit. And to be fair, I wasn't listening to all the voice lines. I wasn't actively reading all of the dialogue. So the story of the campaign could be quite good, and I could just not be giving it a fair review. But I think if you're trying to play through the campaign, you'll enjoy your time, but you'll mostly be enjoying your time from the itemization portion of it, or at least that's what happened with me. Once you complete the campaign, you're going to be doing these monoliths, which is where we are now at as of today. We will be live going through more of the monolith system and learning how that exactly works. And you can see here, this is what it is. This is the map. You go here to your monoliths, and the monoliths sort of allow you to go through a mapping style of system. If we go here to this monolith, you can see there's one on the left here, and this one does enemies gain frenzy and haste when hit, increased rarity, increased experience gain, and you can see what the rewards will be, as opposed to this one, high health enemies deal 30% increased damage, etc. And then as you go through this, you can see it ramps your modifiers and rewards depending upon where we're going. This one has a chance to hit a glancing blow, etc. So you can kind of choose which direction you would like to go with here, and your stability is going to happen as you go through these different monoliths. And you can see this is your stability. Once the stabilities are complete, your echoes are completed, and then my understanding is this resets. Now, I'm not going to give a full review of this monolith mapping system because I don't understand it well enough to give a good impression. That's what I'm going to be doing today. So if you are interested so far in looking at the game, a first review of it, and you want to see what the in-game looks like, I welcome you to come by the stream today. And then we're going to do a full encompassing more of the in-game style of review as well. For me, my first impression on Last Epoch is one of the things we didn't mention is the game is only $35. I believe I've pretty much already got my $35 of value out of the game by the time I got through the campaign. I do think the first portion of the game is going to take you about 10 hours to get through with a casual player, probably 2 days worth of gameplay to get to the portion of where you're onto the monoliths. The 1.0 is going to be coming out on the 21st. Now, ARPGs are mostly in-game driven, let's be honest. People want to know what the maps are like, which are the monoliths in this game. I'm going to dive into that now today on live, and then we'll be coming out with an in-game review and sort of what's the longevity of Last Epoch's content going to end up be looking like as one of our next videos. So subscribe to the channel if you're interested in seeing that one pop up. That's about it for today's video. Thank you for watching the first impressions, and I'll see you on the next one.